Hey everyone, welcome to Better Than Food Book Reviews. Welcome to another patron-only review. Hope you're all doing well. Great to see you as always. Today I'm going to discuss William Styron's Darkness Visible, a memoir of madness. Not the most pleasant read, but a very important one. William Styron is a Pulitzer Prize-winning American author who has suffered from and overcome major depression. This is all about his experience with it. He was from Virginia and wrote The Confessions of Nat Turner and Sophie's Choice, both of which I have not read, but I have heard of. Styron wrote this in 1990. It was actually a lecture in 1989 that became an essay. It talks about the first time he got seriously depressed in 1985 when he was 60 years old and abruptly gave up alcohol. His body suddenly just rejected it, like he couldn't drink anymore all of a sudden, and he had been for a long, long time. He seems to hesitate in the book to say that was directly what caused his depression, because it could have been a number of things. It could have been, and that's the mystery of the disease, is that it could have been any number of things. This is an excellent tool for understanding the point of view of someone with depression, but also understanding how much we don't understand about the disease. I'm only beginning to realize that it's still, it is an incredibly mysterious ailment. There's a lot of things that can cause just like the right mechanisms to switch on or off that kind of develop into this unbelievably crippling, I think as he puts it, despair beyond despair. And it's terrifying, really. And this was recommended to me by a friend of mine in the wake of Anthony Bourdain's suicide. Actually, the same friend and patron and viewer and fan of the show, who is very, very kind for one, but also was the one to inform me of Bourdain's passing very early. And I'm glad I got it from her rather than from another source. So thank you, and thank you for this great read. It's dark, but I think as a tool for education for those of us who may have had dark moments in our lives. I've certainly had very, very dark moments in my life, but they were from, the illness of loved ones, breakups or things that actually make sense. It's the natural response. Depression, like clinical major depression, what Styron is talking about is something where great things are happening, but you're unable to feel good about them. There's this guy named Robert Sapolsky. I'll link to a lecture in the description box below. He's like, this is basically the worst thing you can get, or one of them. It's terrifying. For a similar read from a feminine perspective, you ought to check out Tristomania by an author named Jay Griffiths. I've read that major depression affects 16 million Americans a year. That's an enormous number. That's almost twice as many people that live in New York City. In one country, no less. Suicide apparently is the second leading cause of death for Americans between the age of 15 and 34. And in 2015, which was the latest available data, there were 44,193 reported suicide deaths in the US. And it just seems to be getting worse to some degree. I don't know why. I don't know if things are actually getting worse or if they're actually okay, or we just have more access to information. So it seems like we're getting worse, but I don't know how bad it actually is, but I think it's something that demands to be understood as much as it can be. So like I said, this was originally a lecture in 1989 that he turned into an essay and then wrote this book. Styron describes the exact moment when he realized he might not live through his depression. That's the beginning of the book. And he relates his journey through this mental anguish, this despair beyond despair. This crushing wave of melancholia descends on him. And often you just have to step back and admire his ability to describe the tremendous effort necessary to just endure, right? Just to get through it. Of course, he discusses the stigma with it and the unpleasantness of dealing with psychiatrists who aren't up to snuff, who are basically making bad decisions essentially, which is scary to think about, but certainly must be the case. There's one who does not seem to be supervising the medication he's prescribing to Styron at all in any responsible fashion. Meanwhile, Styron is actually doing his own research and reading medical texts. Being a great writer and a well-known one, he also references other writers and artists who have committed suicide. For some reason, creative types seem to be more susceptible to depression and suicide, although I'm sure that doesn't come as a surprise. There's no shortage of famous authors, many whom I've reviewed, who have taken their own lives. What I take away from this book is that the fragility of our mental state, our mental equilibrium, is terrifying. But the great thing about this is that it can be overcome. And he's very emphatic. on that point. It can, because he did overcome it, obviously. He wrote this book about it, and he wants to stress that point, that you can get out of it. And the overwhelming majority of people who suffer from it do. So, let that be, the silver lining. I know it's not much consolation, especially if you're going through something like this, which just seems absolutely devastating, not only for you, but just for those around you. It's incredible, just the kind of invisible agony, it seems, It's a very disturbing account, but it's well written, convincing, and informative. But there don't seem to be any answers or guaranteed methods of prevention. There could be any number of factors that shift someone's mental landscape and hurl them into the abyss. He references certain poets who've described it, Baudelaire and Dante. He brings up that scene from Bergman's Through a Glass Darkly, where the woman has that episode and she sees what she thinks is God, but then it turns out to be this giant spider that's trying to rape her, and excuse the construction outside. Bergman himself suffered from depression, and of course, his films are bleak as hell and really, really, really depressing, but beautiful though. If you haven't seen enough Bergman, I highly suggest it. Gene Seberg and Roman Gary were acquaintances of Styron, and both of them killed themselves. He was supposed to meet Camus, but then Camus died in that car crash. And it's interesting because he discusses that a little bit. Like, it's not, Camus wasn't driving, but the fellow who was driving was known to be a guy who liked to drive fast. So it's sort of on the fence whether or not Camus was aware of that, and whether or not he kind of like willingly put himself in that kind of danger. And so it's like possible that it could have been suicidal. But because another thing that's brought up is Camus' essay, The Myth of Sisyphus, which is about suicide. I have not read that, but I've heard that's great. The descriptions of the disease and the sleepless nights in particular are excruciating. One of the merciful things about the book is that it's short. It is well written. He is a great writer. It's easy to read. You'll finish it very quickly. And it's nice that you can get in and out, and you can have this sort of this education and not have to go through too much of the darkness. But you really feel it. You certainly come away realizing the gravity. It's not just like something people are just going to get over, or that you realize how, while it may not seem important on the outside, on the inside, it's catastrophic. I mean, it's truly, truly awful. So it just makes you more empathetic. You're getting a clear, blunt description of the difficulties experienced. Styron doesn't seem to be exaggerating and strives for accuracy without resorting to platitudes. Styron found some forms of treatment more humiliating or condescending than helpful, and I imagine that's not an uncommon experience. One of the most important reminders is that we are all susceptible to this. We ourselves may experience symptoms of depression, our family members, our spouses. It doesn't hurt to be a little educated on the subject. This is a great way to prepare ourselves for what we may encounter. Because when you're in it, from what I gather, it doesn't seem like you can see it. When it gets really bad, he describes having suicidal thoughts, these fantasies about how he'll kill himself. And I thought this description was fascinating. Referring to those who are depressed fantasizing about the different ways they're going to kill themselves. These thoughts may seem outlandishly macabre, a strained joke, but they are genuine. They are doubtless especially repugnant to healthy Americans with their faith in self-improvement. Yet in truth, such hideous fantasies which cause well people to shudder are to the deeply depressed mind what lascivious daydreams are to persons of robust sexuality. That was shocking and kind of shifted, oh man. Because it's just this thirst to be free of pain, right? It just depression manifests itself in this really, really insidious form of pain. I don't know anything about SSRIs. I know nothing about medication for depression or anxiety. I said in The Modern Man in Search of a Soul review that being in spiritual or psychic pain and seeing a doctor for 15 minutes, having him do some short tests and then prescribe you drugs is not going to solve your problem. Now, that was a reaction to my impression that there is an overprescription of harmful drugs here in America, which there very well may be. I think in many cases medication can put people in a spot where they can improve themselves and their situation. And that's wonderful. So I certainly wouldn't rule out medication or tell you not to take anything that may help you, or psychotherapy or psychiatry or any of that. I know nothing about it. I'm no expert whatsoever. I'm just wary personally for myself. If you're suffering from major depression or you know someone who is, find help however you can. So the biggest takeaway for me was my realization of my own inadequate knowledge of depression and the mystery of the condition. In the book, Styron says it ought to be treated more like a disease such as cancer, and I'm in full agreement. So the book is a great introduction to the subject through the depiction of one author's firsthand experience with it. And it's also an excellent reminder for us to take care of our own mental health, to guard against whatever issues we may face down the road just through diet and exercise and not drinking too much and not abusing drugs and so on and so forth. It's just a good reminder to take care of yourself. It's scary, because it's not external, it's internal. It's not as if like you're catching a disease from germs or something. It's like your own mind is like eating itself. It's like this cannibalization of your neurological processes or something. It's so scary. It's really rough. What could be worse than just the total destruction of happiness? I don't know. Though Styron's descriptions are terrifying, again, he insists that it can be overcome, and that most people with depression do overcome it and don't commit suicide. By far, the great majority of the people who go through even the severest depression survive it, and live ever afterward at least as happily as their unafflicted counterparts. Save for the awfulness of certain memories it leaves, acute depression inflicts few permanent wounds. There is a Sisyphean torment in the fact that a great number, as many as half, of those who are devastated once will be struck again. Depression has the habit of recurrence, but most victims live through even these relapses, often coping better because they have become psychologically tuned by past experience to deal with the ogre. Yeah. It's rough. But there's definitely hope. So if you're going through something like this, know that you're not alone. Don't give up. And one more thing. His advice to those who have family members or loved ones who are dealing with this is to practice endless patience. Practice endless patience, because it does help. It really does. The love and support of others saves many lives. So, yeah. Excuse the gloomy and humorless review, but I thought it was important. And I thought that if you're interested in this subject, then, it seems like essential reading for a study of depression, right? So I really enjoyed it. Now who's going to get it? It's the little things in life. And coffee, well, maybe that's not such a little thing for me, but I really love coffee. And I think it helps. So I'm happy to send off this book along with a bag of coffee to one of y'all who have been very kind to support the show. Who's it going to be? Chris. Thank you so much, Chris. You're going to get Darkness Visible, A Memoir of Madness by William Styron. And if you'd prefer a different book, I'd be happy to send you something else because this is rather specific and really, really dark. But if it sounds like something you're interested in, I'm very happy to send it your way. And you'll definitely be getting coffee regardless. All right, always remember, die reading. Thank you very much, everyone, for supporting the show. Hope this was helpful. Hope you're all doing well, and I'll talk to you soon. Have a good night. Take care. Ciao.